The day I signed the mortgage documents was one of the best in my life. My name is Celia, and at the age of 30, I finally got my own place away from the constant criticism of my parents and the endless drama of my sister Paulina. But the real icing on the cake was what I did the following weekend. I adopted Lucky, a golden Labrador with soulful brown eyes that melted my heart the moment I saw him at the orphanage. My parents have always rejected my requests to get a dog, saying that dogs are dirty, spoil furniture, and require too much care. No matter how much I begged or promised to take care of everything myself, the answer was always a firm no. As a child, I dreamed of a devoted four-legged friend, but all I could do was watch other children play with their pets and convince myself that one day I would live the way I wanted. To compensate for this, I turned my love for animals to volunteer work, helping out at a local shelter every Saturday. I walked the dogs, cleaned the enclosures, brought treats and old blankets. Now, I watched Lucky explore my new apartment, his new home. I felt an amazing sense of completion that I had never experienced before. He ran around the rooms, wagging his tail happily, peering curiously into every corner, and then, apparently satisfied with the inspection, plopped down at my feet, resting his head on my lap. I gently ran my hand over his soft fur, smiling. After a few days, we got used to our routine: morning walks before work, evening workouts, Saturday adventures at the dog park. I enrolled Lucky in a professional training course not because he was behaving badly, but because I wanted to give him the best life I could. His coach Mark told me after the first class, "Learns fast, strives to please. You have a wonderful dog." I was beaming with pride. Yes, he was just amazing. 3 weeks after I brought Lucky home, I decided it was time to introduce him to his family. I hesitated for a long time, feeling that this would not be the best idea. But on the other hand, I wanted to show them how wonderful, well-mannered, and loving he is. Maybe then they'll understand why I've been dreaming about a dog for so many years. However, as soon as I entered my parents' house, I realized that it was a mistake. Mom's face twisted as if she sensed something disgusting. The father crossed his arms over his chest, showing his displeasure with his whole appearance. Paulina, my 25-year-old sister, who was still living at home, rolled her eyes. "You really brought him into the house," Mom said, stepping back as if Lucky could attack her perfectly polished shoes at any moment. "His name is Lucky." "And yes, I brought him." "It's February outside, and it's cold," I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite the tension in the air. My father looked at Lucky, who was sitting perfectly straight next to me, just as we had rehearsed. "Okay, but don't let him get on the furniture. Your mother recently had the sofas cleaned," he muttered. "He won't," I assured him, patting Lucky gently on the head. He looked at me with his trusting eyes, completely unaware of the cold reception he received. We went into the kitchen, where Mom had already set the table. Lucky lay down at my feet without making a sound, and I couldn't help but smile, delighted by his perfect behavior. However, instead of asking me how I was settling into my new place or how my job was going, my mother started talking about Paulina. "Did you hear that? Paulina will be promoted soon." Yes, my boss practically guaranteed that it would happen in a couple of weeks. The nurse immediately roused herself, straightening up in her chair. "And I will finally be able to afford my own place." Mom threw up her hands. "You see, Paulina. Just a little more, and you'll have your own apartment, and you won't have to live alone with a dog." I tensed, but said nothing. It was obvious that my success meant much less to my mother than Paulina's possible promotion. "It's great to have your own place," I said calmly, pretending not to notice Mom's disregard. "It gives you freedom, the opportunity to do what you want, without having to constantly consult with your parents." Paulina frowned, as if she had caught a hidden meaning in my words, but she didn't say anything. I reached under the table and stroked Lucky's ear. He was there, quiet and loyal. Unlike my family, he didn't judge me. The irony did not escape me. Paulina complained about the control of her parents, continuing to live under their roof and follow their rules at the age of 25. "Well, we're very proud of you," Dad said, beaming, and then, as if remembering that I was also at the table, he added, "Celia, you're doing great, you're doing well with the mortgage payments." I barely had time to open my mouth to respond when I felt movement at my feet. Lucky moved under the table, his wet nose lightly touching Paulina's knee. "Ah, ah. Get it away from me." "Stop it," she screamed, pushing back her chair abruptly, as if a wild animal had attacked her. "He just wanted to say hello," I explained calmly, gently guiding Lucky back to me. But Mom was already shaking her head disapprovingly. "Celia, I think it would be better if you didn't bring the dog when you come in the future. Your sister is clearly uncomfortable, and to be honest, neither are we." I looked around the table, lingering on their faces, on this unanimous expression of dislike. The familiar disappointment squeezed his chest. Nothing has changed. I was still a stranger in this family. And now Lucky, too. "We have to go," I said, getting up. "I have things to do." I grabbed my bag and confidently headed for the exit. When Lucky and I were driving home, he was peacefully curled up in the passenger seat. I glanced at him briefly, and then realization hit me like a wave. Over the years, I've been trying to please my parents and meet their expectations, but now that I have my own home and Lucky is nearby, I finally have the freedom to live on my own terms. "Just you and me, buddy," I said, reaching out to scratch his ear. In the following months, I began to visit my parents' house less often. When I did visit them, it was only when my friend Tara could look after Lucky. And each time, the conversation inevitably boiled down to Paulina, her career, plans, and dreams. I'm used to it. The usual scenario is that I play the role of a supportive older sister, listening to her progress, but each time I feel like I'm moving further away from my family. During one of these visits, Paulina literally squeezed past me in the hallway, her lips pursed, and disappointment could be seen in her eyes. "It failed," she said. "What?" "Promotion. The boss said, maybe next quarter." I saw her irritation turn to fleeting pain. "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "Such things happen. There will be other possibilities." She sighed heavily, leaned against the wall, and suddenly looked down at my car keys in my hand. "Are you leaving already?" "You just arrived." "I need to get back to Lucky. Tara has plans today." Paulina snorted. "You're acting like it's your child or something." I just shrugged my shoulders. She shook her head, then looked at me with an expression I didn't immediately understand. "You're lucky," she said suddenly. "You have your own place. Cooking your own rolls is probably nice." I froze for a second. Yes, it was nice. But it wasn't luck. It was years of hard work, constant planning, and striving for independence, all the things that Paulina didn't seem to want to do. My life was going on in the usual rhythm. Morning runs with Lucky, work at a marketing firm, his enthusiastic greetings when I returned home, weekends at the dog park, and lazy evenings with a book. It was a simple but cozy routine that I built for myself. But one Tuesday, my boss called me into the office. "Celia, I have a suggestion for you," she said, putting a folder in front of me. I looked at her questioningly. "We're opening a new branch in Colorado," she continued. "And we need someone who can organize his work." I blinked, surprised. "You want me to?" 2 months on the spot, the boss nodded. "You will train the team, set up the processes, and then come back. This is a great opportunity." Colorado. 2 months. I felt a slight excitement mixed with anxiety. It was a chance to advance my career, to prove to myself that I was capable of more. I looked at the details. The assignment looked difficult but exciting, and although the prospect of a temporary move bothered me a little, it was a significant step on my career path. "If you do well, we're considering a promotion when you get back," the boss continued, watching my reaction. I knew that I shouldn't miss this opportunity, but at the same time, I couldn't help but worry. I need to figure out a few things, but I want this opportunity, I said. Can I give you a definite answer tomorrow? Sure, but don't delay. That evening, when I got home, I immediately sat down at my laptop, exploring overexposure options for Lucky. I looked through pet hotels, read reviews, and compared conditions, but the thought of him spending 2 months in a kennel broke my heart. He's been to a shelter before. He knew what it meant to be abandoned. I couldn't bear the thought of him feeling abandoned again. I closed my laptop and closed my eyes, leaning my head against the back of the chair. Somewhere on the periphery of my mind, I hoped that a solution would come by itself. The next day, there was a knock on my door. I was surprised when I saw Paulina on the doorstep. She fidgeted restlessly, as if she didn't know what to say. Mom said you weren't answering her calls, so she sent me to check on you, she announced, walking inside without waiting for an invitation. Lucky, as always, happily ran up to the guest, wagging his tail. When he tried to lick Paulina's hand, she pulled away. Oh, stop it, she grimaced. I stifled a sigh and closed the door. Why do you have suitcases in the hallway? What is it? She asked, pointing to the luggage I had taken out of the storage. I explained to her about the business trip, and when I mentioned a possible promotion, her eyes lit up with interest. So what's the problem? What is it? She asked, plopping down on the couch. That sounds like an amazing opportunity. Lucky, I said, looking at the dog, who had settled into his crib. I do not know where he will live while I am gone. Paulina looked at him, and I noticed something change in her expression. I could keep an eye on him, she suddenly suggested. I stared at her, not sure if I'd heard her correctly. You? But you don't even like dogs. She shrugged her shoulders. I could stay here in your apartment. It'll give me a break from Mom and Dad, and you won't have to put him in some kind of kennel. I hesitated. There was something wrong with this sudden change of mood, but I was running out of options. There will be rules, I said firmly. No parties. Keep the place clean. Lucky needs to walk twice a day. His food is measured out, I'll show you how much. Oh, Celia, she interrupted, rolling her eyes. I'm not a child. The day of my departure came too soon. Paulina arrived with 2 huge suitcases, as if she was moving here forever, and not just to take care of the dog. I remind you that Lucky's dinner is at 6, and he gets a tooth treat before going to bed, I said, waiting for a taxi. Everything's going to be fine, Paulina replied nonchalantly, pushing me towards the door. Go, be successful. Buddy and I are going to have a great time. I knelt down to hug Lucky, feeling a lump in my throat. Be a good boy, I whispered, burying my fingers in his soft fur. I'm going to miss you. A taxi honked its horn outside. I took one last look at Lucky, then at Paulina. No parties, I reminded her once more. She waved it away. Everything is under control. The first week in Colorado was a whirlwind of meetings, discussions, and systems set up for the new office. I came to the hotel late, exhausted, but every evening I wrote to Paulina to find out how Lucky was doing. It's okay, she answered shortly. Or, Lucky's fine. Stop worrying. Sometimes I managed to reach her via video link, and then I saw Lucky, his joyful face, and heard his excited barking when he recognized my voice. It calmed the anxiety a bit. In the 3rd week, I got into a rhythm. The new team was full of enthusiasm, and to my surprise, I began to enjoy the challenge of this job. The news from Paulina kept coming. They were always positive. Always brief. Then, late one night, my phone rang. I looked at the screen, and the number was familiar. It was Mrs. Tassany, my elderly neighbor from the apartment across the street, a strict but fair woman with a penetrating gaze and an unfailing love of order. "Celia, dear," she began in her slightly irritated voice, "I hate to bother you, but your apartment has been a real mess the last few nights. Loud music, endless people coming and going. And, most importantly, your dog." I tensed, clutching my phone. "What's wrong with Lucky?" "He barks a lot. Crying. He doesn't seem happy." Mrs. Tassany's words pierced me like an icy knife. I closed my eyes, trying to process what was said. "Thanks for calling, Mrs. Tassany," I said, trying to stay calm. After finishing the call, I immediately dialed Paulina. The beeps went on endlessly. 1, 2, 3. It wasn't until the fourth ring that she answered. "Hello," she shouted over the booming music thundering in the background. "Paulina, what's going on out there? Turn off the music. We need to talk." The volume of the sounds dropped sharply, but laughter and muffled voices could still be heard through the speaker. "What happened?" "Too late." I gritted my teeth. "My neighbor just called me. She said you were throwing parties and Lucky was upset." Paulina chuckled. "Your neighbor is exaggerating. I just had a few friends, that's all. Lucky's fine." "Show me the apartment," I demanded. A few seconds of silence. Then the screen changed to an image, red plastic cups randomly scattered on my coffee table, a half-spilled bottle of wine, furniture dislodged from its usual places, and a group of people who didn't seem to be going anywhere. The living room looked like a battlefield after a day-long party. "Where's Lucky?" My voice became dangerously quiet. The camera wavered slightly, then slowly moved, showing the kitchen. Lucky was sitting in a corner, pressed against the wall, curled up into a tight ball. His ears were flattened, his eyes anxiously following the movement of the camera. I felt anger rising in me. Get everyone out of the apartment immediately. And take Lucky for a real walk. Paulina rolled her eyes, but nodded. Good, good. Tomorrow everything will be back to normal. Stop overreacting so much. I disconnected the call, clutching the phone so tightly that my fingers turned white. My first impulse was to buy a ticket for the next flight home, but I forced myself to take a deep breath and tried to find a more reasonable solution. Parents. They have to help. They love Lucky too, right? I rang the bell. As soon as Mom picked up the phone, I quickly explained the situation, hoping that she would understand the seriousness of what was happening and talk to Paulina. "You're making a big deal out of a molehill, Celia," Mom interrupted me, sounding annoyed. "Paulina is just enjoying a little freedom from us." I pressed my lips together. "But she promised to take care of Lucky, and she's breaking that promise." "It's just a dog," my father interjected. "To be honest, you've always been too tense. No wonder you don't have many friends." I froze. It was like a punch in the gut. "Will you at least check on her? Make sure the apartment is in order?" "You're in control, as always," Mom snapped. "Paulina will be fine. Don't call us again with these petty complaints." Beeps. They hung up the phone. I sat on the bed, feeling frustration merge with rage and powerlessness. Of course, they didn't take my side. Of course, they protected Paulina again. The days after that conversation blurred into one continuous blur. I threw myself into my work, trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety, checking Paulina's messages every day, which invariably boiled down to short, concise phrases like "everything's fine" or "stop worrying." Over the weekend, I tried to call her to make a video call and see Lucky. I missed him terribly and wanted to hear his joyful bark, to see how he wagged his tail when he recognized my voice. "Sorry, I can't talk right now, I'm walking Lucky," came her dry reply. I tried again in the evening. "Call me tomorrow." Tomorrow has arrived. More excuses. By Monday, my suspicions began to creep in. Why does she avoid video calls so much? Why did her answers become so monosyllabic? Why is she busy every time I call? For several days, when I tried to see Lucky via video, Paulina always had a reason why she couldn't show him right now. He was asleep, she was on the road, or her phone suddenly went dead, and each time, to confirm her words, she sent me a new photo. Lucky looked happy and relaxed, sprawled out on my couch, as if he wasn't at all bothered by what was happening around him. I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that my sister was fulfilling her part of the promise, even if it was a stretch, and that Lucky was really safe, but some vague worry kept bothering me until I accidentally noticed one detail that made my pulse race. The photo that Paulina sent me in the evening was taken in bright daylight. I frowned, flipping through the correspondence back, and suddenly a realization struck me. It was exactly the same image she sent me 3 weeks ago. Absolutely identical. She was resending old photos. My heart began to beat faster, my palms began to sweat, and a wave of panic rose in my chest. Why is she doing this? What if something happened to Lucky and she just doesn't want to tell me? With trembling fingers, I dialed Mrs. Tassiney's number, hoping that she would be able to confirm that everything was fine with my dog, that it was just a stupid coincidence and I was winding myself up for nothing. "Hi, Celia," she replied after a couple of rings, her voice sounding less annoyed this time than it had in our last conversation. "Hello, Mrs. Tassiney," I tried to speak calmly, but even I could hear my voice shaking. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to ask about Lucky. Have you seen him recently? Did you hear him barking?" There was a pause on the line that froze my blood. "Now that you mention it," she finally said, and it seemed to me that her voice had become a little worried. "No, I didn't hear your dog. At least for a couple of weeks now." An icy needle of fear pierced me. "And the parties? Are they still going on?" "Not like before," sighed Mrs. Tassiney. "It's quieter now, but Lucky. I didn't hear him barking at all." I swallowed, trying to control the rising panic. "Thank you for telling me." I hung up the call, staring at the phone automatically, while terrible thoughts swarmed in my head. Where was Lucky? What did Paulina do to him? Without hesitating for another second, I immediately texted her. "I need to see Lucky. Video call. Now." The red check mark indicated that the message had been delivered, but there was no response. I tried calling, but she dropped it. I called back, and it was voicemail. My fingers were shaking as I recorded the voice message. "Paulina, I know you're lying about the photos. Call me back immediately and show me Lucky, or I swear I'll call the police and report him missing." An hour passed. Then 2. No reply, no new messages. I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't eat, couldn't work, couldn't even sit still, because every cell in my body demanded immediate action. I checked my phone every few minutes, hoping to see an answer, but it never came. That night passed in a sleepless fog. By morning, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. My fingers were shaking as I dialed my boss's number. "This is Celia," I gasped as soon as she answered. "I need to get home." "Celia?" Jenna looked surprised. "What happened?" "It's an emergency," I blurted out, gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "Celia, calm down, explain what's going on." I took a deep breath, trying to get my thoughts in order, but my voice still sounded broken when I spoke. "I think something's happened to Lucky. My sister isn't answering her phone, and my neighbor hasn't seen or heard from him in weeks." It was quiet on the other end of the line for a second. "I understand that you're worried," Jenna finally said, her voice soft but wary. "But we are in the midst of an important project right now. Are you sure you can't wait until the weekend?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. "Jenna," I squeezed my eyes shut, holding back tears. I know that this project is important for my career. I know I'm risking my promotion. But Lucky is my family. And I can't sit here doing reports while he might need help. Another pause. I was almost afraid she would say no. But then Jenna sighed. I also had a dog. If I were you, I would do the same thing. I froze. Does that mean that? It means that go. Her voice was firm but friendly. You've already done most of the work, we'll handle the rest. I exhaled, hardly believing that she had really let me go. Thanks, I whispered, already reaching for my suitcase. Call me when you figure it out, Jenna said. I nodded, even though I knew she couldn't see it. I already knew that my next call would be to the airline. I had to go home. And I needed to do it right now. I booked the first flight I could find, feverishly packed my things and rushed to the airport, almost unaware of my actions. My every movement was automatic, subordinated to a single goal: to return home as soon as possible and find Lucky. The words I was going to say to Paulina were swarming in my head, but the closer I got to the house, the more they congealed into a cold, sharp lump of anger that slowly but inexorably grew inside me. By the time the plane landed, it was already around midnight. I called a taxi, gave my address, and sat in tense silence the whole way, gritting my teeth and clenching my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. The city outside the window flashed with blurred lights, but I didn't notice either its beauty or the silence of the night streets. All my concentration was focused on one thing: getting to the apartment, finding out what happened, and, if necessary, getting Paulina to tell me everything she was hiding. When the taxi pulled up to my building, I heard music coming from the third floor, from my floor. Fine. Another party. I paid the driver, grabbed my suitcase, and walked briskly up the stairs. The music grew louder as I approached my door, and with it my tension grew, turning into an icy, merciless rage. What greeted me was exactly what I expected. My apartment turned into a nightclub full of strangers who didn't seem to care at all about being out of their homes. A dozen guests sprawled in the living room, some laughing, some arguing loudly, some waving their arms, knocking over drinks on the floor, leaving sticky footprints on my parquet floor. Red plastic cups and empty bottles were scattered everywhere, and the furniture that had once made my home feel cozy had been mercilessly pushed against the walls to make room for dancing. The air was heavy, saturated with the smell of alcohol, cigarette smoke, and the sweet aroma of some cheap perfume. I threw the suitcase on the floor with force, making the nearest guests flinch, went to the speaker from which the music was blaring, and without hesitation pulled the plug out of the socket. The sudden silence hit my ears. Everyone froze, turning to me. "The party's over," I announced in a flat, icy voice that seemed even quieter than the music. There were confused whispers, but no one dared to argue. Something in my face must have conveyed all the storm that was boiling inside me, because people began to pack their things, quickly and silently, passing by me with awkward glances and mumbled apologies. Paulina came out of the kitchen, swaying slightly. "Celia?" Her face twisted in surprise. "What are you doing here? You should be in Colorado." I didn't answer. "Where's Lucky?" I asked instead, ignoring her question. Paulina looked around nervously, as if checking if all her guests had left. "He's not here right now," she muttered. "I see," my voice was low and cold. "Where is he?" Paulina blinked, and then something changed in her face. Something like defiance, vindictiveness, and annoyance flashed in her eyes. "Do you want to know where your precious dog is?" Her voice became deliberately slow, dragging out each word, as if she was savoring the moment. "I'm tired of him." I froze. "What did you say?" "I said he ruined all my fun," she continued, folding her arms over her chest. "He barked all the time when people came. He was—" She grimaced, as if remembering something unpleasant, a pain in the ass. The world around me froze, shrank into a narrow point, and my sister became the center of it. What did you do? I whispered. Paulina shrugged her shoulders. I took him to a shelter. It seemed to me that the ground was sinking under my feet. Which shelter? I managed to say. How should I know? She sighed with annoyance, as if I was asking some stupid question. Something. The first one that came across on the way. I didn't remember how I got next to her, but suddenly we were face to face, so close that I could see every detail of her face, a slight blush from alcohol, parted lips, a shadow of a grin at the corners of her mouth. I hated her. With such force that it even scared me. Pack your things and get out, I whispered, each word reverberating like thunder in my head. Right now. Or I swear I'll do something we'll both regret. She opened her mouth as if she was going to say something, but I had already turned away. A few minutes later, she left, slamming the door loudly. As soon as she was gone, I collapsed on the couch. Exhaustion gripped me, but with it came fear. Lucky was in some kind of shelter. But in what way? There were at least a dozen of them in the city, and if he stayed too long, it might be too late. I pulled myself together with difficulty, grabbed my phone and started looking for shelters in the area. It was after midnight, too late for calls, but I could send emails. I quickly wrote the same message for all possible places: Golden Labrador, named Lucky, 3 years old, with a microchip. Please contact me if you have it. She attached her contact information and sent it to all the shelters she could find. It was impossible to sleep. I spent the night cleaning up the mess Paulina had left behind, and every time I came across one of Lucky's toys, something inside me broke into pieces. By morning, I was on nothing but coffee and pure anxiety. The sleepless hours had turned my body into a taut string ready to snap at the slightest touch, but the only thing that really mattered was finding Lucky, making sure he was okay, taking him home and never letting anyone separate us again. As soon as the shelters started working, I started calling them one by one, but in the first 4 no one had registered a dog matching Lucky's description, and with each new refusal, a suffocating feeling of panic grew inside me, forcing my imagination to imagine the most terrible scenarios. What if he had already been handed over to new owners? What if he ran away and ended up back on the street? What if? The 5th call changed everything. Yes, we had a Labrador, the woman on the other end of the line replied, and I immediately straightened up, gripping the phone so tightly that my fingers were numb. He was brought in about 2 weeks ago. They found one, without a collar, but with a microchip. We tried to contact the owner, but the specified number immediately transfers to voicemail. My heart sank. My old number. The one I changed 6 months ago and updated everywhere, except, as it turned out, the microchip database. Lucky is my dog, I said, feeling my voice tremble treacherously. His name is Lucky. I'm Celia Weber. I can come right now with the documents confirming that it belongs to me. We close at 5, the woman said calmly, but I detected a note of benevolence in her voice. I'll be waiting for you. Thanks, I breathed, already grabbing my bag and car keys. The shelter was on the other side of town, half an hour away, but the road seemed endless to me. Every minute dragged on for an excruciatingly long time, and despite all my efforts, I couldn't get rid of the obsessive image of Lucky, scared, confused, sitting in a cage and wondering why I had abandoned him. As soon as I got there, I practically jumped out of the car, slamming the door on the move, and ran inside, clutching the adoption papers in my hands. The woman at the counter checked my details, then motioned for me to follow her. He's here, she said, stopping in front of one of the enclosures. I froze. Lucky was curled up in a tight ball in the corner of the cage. He looked smaller than I remembered, his fur had faded, losing its usual golden sheen, and he didn't even look up when we approached. Lucky, I called softly. His ears twitched. His head snapped up, and at the same moment our eyes met. The moment of recognition that I saw in his eyes will stay with me forever. Surprise, hope, delight mixed in them, and just a second later he jumped to his feet, wagged his tail so hard that his whole body shook himself and burst into happy barking, echoing throughout the shelter. The employee unlocked the cage, but before I could properly open the door, Lucky had already jumped into my arms, whining and flooding my face with joyful licks. I hugged him as tightly as I could, tears streaming down my cheeks, and I whispered apologies that he might not understand, but it seems he has already forgiven. The paperwork took a few minutes, and so we left the shelter together. Lucky pressed against my leg all the way home, as if he was afraid that if he lost contact, I would disappear again. As soon as we returned to the apartment, the first thing I did was wash him thoroughly, check if there were any health problems, but fortunately he was fine. He had lost a little weight, a little anxious, but still the same Lucky, my Lucky. He slept in my bed that night. I'd never allowed it before, but what roles could there be now if the only thing I wanted was to feel him next to me, hear him breathing, and know that he was safe again? The next morning, the phone rang. Mom. I stared at the screen for several long seconds before answering. Celia, she began without any preliminaries, we need to talk about what happened to Paulina. I gritted my teeth, already knowing where this was going. She's very upset. I snorted. Is she upset? I asked incredulously, feeling anger rising in me again. She abandoned my dog at the shelter and trashed my apartment. Don't be so dramatic, Mom replied irritably. It was just a stupid dog, and Paulina was just having a little fun with her friends. Stupid dog. Next to me, Lucky raised his head and looked at me with his big, trusting brown eyes, the same ones that showed expectation, patience, and boundless love, the same eyes that made him wait for me at the orphanage, even when he might have already begun to lose hope. That was the last straw. No, I said firmly. What? No, I repeated, slowly, clearly, so that she couldn't pretend she didn't understand. I'm not going to apologize. Celia. Lucky is my family, even if you don't understand it, I interrupted. And until Paulina takes responsibility for what she did, and until you and Dad stop making excuses for her, I don't want to hear from any of you. My mother gasped, and there was shock mixed with indignation in her voice, as if I had just said something unimaginably blasphemous, something beyond her comprehension. You don't mean, her voice broke, and then gained strength again, now filled with reproach and rejection. Would you prefer a dog to your family? I took a deep breath, not wanting to get involved in a useless argument anymore, not wanting to explain the obvious again to people who weren't even trying to understand. I choose to surround myself with beings who respect me and whom I can trust, I replied calmly, even surprised at how easy and natural it sounded, as if I had finally said something that should have been said a long time ago. And right now it's not you, Dad, or Paulina. The silence on her part lasted a few seconds, but I didn't wait for her answer. Goodbye, Mom. I hit the end button and closed my eyes, clutching the phone to my palm, feeling my heart pounding in my chest, but at the same time realizing that my mind was clearer than ever. For so many years, I tried to meet their expectations, to be a comfortable daughter, to match their ideas of what I need to be, but at that moment I finally decided that I would be the person I should be for myself and Lucky, not for them. The following weeks were not easy. My parents and Paulina tried to contact me over and over again, first calls, then texts, first apologetic apologies, then reproaches, followed by angry accusations that repeated in the same order, like a broken record. I've blocked their numbers. I needed time to heal the wounds, to rebuild the trust that had been destroyed not only between Lucky and me, but also my own faith in myself, in the correctness of my decisions, that I had the right to distance myself from people who bring me nothing but pain. My job became my salvation. Jenna, my boss, understood the reasons for my early return, and even though I hadn't worked in Colorado for the full 2 months, she was impressed with what I had achieved during my business trip. The promotion we were talking about has taken place. With him came a raise in salary, and the first expense I allowed myself was a subscription to a Good Day kennel for dogs, so that on those days when I couldn't work from home, Lucky wouldn't stay alone, but would spend time in the company of other dogs, playing and having fun. Gradually, life entered a new rhythm. One Saturday morning, when Lucky and I went to the dog park as usual, he became friends with a German shepherd named Max. They immediately began running after each other across the green lawns, eagerly digging holes and fighting over some old, battered toy, which, apparently, was the most valuable thing in the world. While our dogs were frolicking, I talked to Max's owner, a tall, dark-haired man named David, and to my surprise, I found that it was easy and pleasant to communicate with him, as if we had known each other for a long time, although we had never crossed paths before. Before leaving the park, we exchanged phone numbers, agreeing to meet here next week, but soon our meeting stopped being limited to dog walks and turned into leisurely conversations over a cup of coffee, and then into real dinners. David turned out to be kind, attentive, empathetic, with a light sense of humor that made me laugh until I cried, and what was especially important to me was that he adored Lucky almost as much as I did. 6 months later, when winter was already receding and the streets were getting warmer, I received a letter. From Paulina. I stared at the envelope for a long time, not daring to open it. A part of me had already gotten used to her silence over the months and was afraid that there would be accusations again, attempts to manipulate my feelings again. But when I finally opened the letter, it turned out that it was not at all what I expected. It was an apology. It wasn't perfect, and there were still traces of attempts to justify herself, but it was sincere enough for me to see that she was really thinking about what she had done. She did not beg for forgiveness, did not demand that I immediately forget everything that had happened, did not try to belittle my feelings. She just wrote that she understood that she had done a terrible thing. She acknowledged the pain she had caused me. She admitted that she had hurt Lucky. She said she didn't expect me to forgive her right away, but she wanted me to know that she realized what she had done and was sorry for it. I read the letter over and over again, not knowing how to feel. I didn't answer right away. I needed time to figure out if I wanted to let her back into my life in any capacity. It was a decision that didn't need to be rushed. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.